The metal locker door slammed shut with Emma Carter's head trapped inside, her skull bouncing off the back wall like a pinball as Jake Morrison's meaty fist kept the door sealed tight. Blood trickled from her nose, mixing with tears she refused to let fall, while Ryan Phillips held her arms behind her back and the other three circled like vultures waiting for roadkill. The hallway of Riverside High echoed with their laughter, a sound that would haunt the East Wing for years to come. But not for the reasons they expected. Emma's vision blurred as oxygen became scarce, but her mind remained crystal clear, cataloging every face, every voice, every detail. She'd learned from her father that evidence was everything, and right now she was gathering enough to destroy them all. What Jake Morrison didn't know was that the quiet girl he was suffocating had been trained by a police officer who never backed down from a fight, and she'd been planning this moment for 3 months. The shy girl was about to become their worst nightmare. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. 3 months earlier, Emma Carter had walked through the doors of Riverside High School, carrying nothing but a worn backpack and the weight of her father's memory. Officer David Carter had been shot responding to a domestic violence call in downtown Portland, taking 3 bullets meant for a woman he'd never met, but swore to protect. The funeral had been a blur of folded flags and tearful speeches, but Emma remembered every word of her father's partner's eulogy about a man who never walked away from someone who needed help. Now she was the one who needed help, and there was no one coming. Millbrook, Oregon felt like another planet compared to the urban chaos of Portland. Riverside High School sprawled across manicured lawns like something from a movie, all glass and steel and promise. Emma's mother Lisa had taken the transfer as a chance for a fresh start, away from the reporters and the memorials and the constant reminders of what they'd lost. The night shift at Millbrook General Hospital paid well enough to cover their small apartment on the wrong side of town, but the academic scholarship Emma had earned was their ticket to something better. All she had to do was survive high school. The first week passed in relative anonymity. Emma had perfected the art of invisibility over the years, choosing seats in the back corner of every classroom, eating lunch alone in the library, walking the halls with her head down and her earbuds in. She'd learned that being noticed was dangerous, that standing out made you a target. Her father had taught her that predators look for the weak, the isolated, the ones who couldn't fight back. What he hadn't taught her was what to do when the predators wore leather jackets and had their pictures hanging in trophy cases. Jake Morrison noticed her during chemistry class, not because of anything she said or did, but because she finished the advanced placement exam in 15 minutes while he was still struggling with the first page. Mr. Peterson, a nervous man who'd been teaching at Riverside for 20 years, announced the scores with the enthusiasm of someone walking to his own execution. Emma Carter, 100%. Jake Morrison, 68%. The temperature in the room didn't just drop, it plummeted into Arctic territory. Emma felt the shift immediately, the way conversation stopped mid-sentence and heads turned in her direction. She'd made a mistake, the same one she'd made in Portland before learning to hide her intelligence like a shameful secret. Gifted programs and honor rolls were fine for kids whose parents donated wings to the school, but scholarship students were supposed to know their place. She packed her books quickly, not running but moving with purpose, hoping to escape before the inevitable confrontation. Jake caught up with her at her locker, his massive frame blocking her path like a mountain of teenage entitlement. Up close, she could see why half the girls at Riverside swooned over him. All square jaw and perfect teeth, and the kind of symmetrical features that belonged on recruitment posters. But Emma had seen enough monsters in her short life to know that evil wore many faces, and sometimes the prettiest ones were the most dangerous. Ryan Phillips appeared at her other side, boxing her in with practiced ease. Where Jake was all brute force and intimidation, Ryan was surgical precision, his smile sharp enough to cut glass. Behind them, Cole Davidson, Matt Stevens, and Drew Wilson formed a semicircle, each playing their assigned role in a drama they'd performed dozens of times before. The quarterback, the enforcer, the follower, the recorder, and the muscle. A perfect ecosystem of cruelty. Emma had done her research before accepting the scholarship. Ashley Chun had been a student here 2 years ago. Another scholarship kid had made the mistake of outperforming her social superiors. The official story was that she'd transferred to a private school in California for better opportunities. The real story, which Emma had pieced together from old social media posts and archived news articles, was that Ashley had been hospitalized after a hazing incident gone wrong. Her parents had been paid handsomely for their silence, and Ashley had disappeared from Oregon entirely. The warning signs were there from the beginning. Her textbooks disappeared from her locker, only to reappear in the dumpster behind the cafeteria. Anonymous messages appeared on her social media accounts, calling her names that made her mother weep when she accidentally saw them. Her bicycle tires were slashed twice in the first month. Small violations, carefully orchestrated, always with plausible deniability. Emma documented everything. Every message, every incident, every face she recognized in the crowd that gathered to watch her humiliation. Her father had taught her that evidence was worthless without someone willing to listen. But he'd also taught her that preparation was the difference between victim and survivor. She'd been preparing for this fight her entire life, even before she knew it was coming. The breaking point came on a Tuesday in October, when Jake Morrison decided that subtle psychological warfare wasn't enough anymore. He wanted blood, and he wanted an audience. The East Wing hallway was always crowded between third and fourth period, plenty of witnesses to spread the story, but none brave enough to intervene. Emma was reaching into her locker when she felt the first push. The push came from behind, sending Emma stumbling forward into the open locker door. Before she could regain her balance, Jake's hand slammed against her back, driving her deeper into the metal cavity. The textbooks and binders crashed to the floor as her head struck the back wall, stars exploding across her vision like tiny fireworks. She tried to pull back, but Ryan grabbed her shoulders and shoved her forward again, this time with enough force to rattle her teeth. Drew Wilson positioned himself as lookout while Matt Stevens pulled out his phone, angling for the perfect shot. Cole Davidson stood frozen, his face cycling between excitement and horror as he watched his heroes cross a line he wasn't sure he wanted to cross. The hallway filled with the sound of slamming metal as Jake repeatedly drove the locker door against Emma's trapped form, each impact punctuated by laughter that echoed off the polished floors. Emma's hands found purchase on the locker frame, and she pushed back with surprising strength. Jake stumbled backward, caught off guard by the resistance. For a moment, their eyes met, and she saw something flicker across his features that might have been respect if it hadn't been so quickly replaced by rage. Blood ran from her nose in a steady stream, staining her white shirt crimson, but her voice remained steady when she spoke. The next words that came out of Emma Carter's mouth would be replayed on social media for weeks, dissected by students and parents alike, analyzed by school administrators, and ultimately used as evidence in court proceedings. She looked Jake Morrison directly in the eyes, wiped the blood from her face with the back of her hand, and said with perfect clarity that carried down the entire hallway, "Is that the best you've got, or should I call your daddy to come finish the job?" The silence that followed was deafening. Jake's face went through several shades of red before settling on a purple that suggested either imminent violence or a stroke. Ryan's mouth fell open in genuine shock. Even Matt lowered his phone, too stunned to keep recording. In the social ecosystem of Riverside High School, scholarship students simply did not speak to quarterback royalty that way. They especially didn't do it while bleeding from a locker assault in front of half the junior class. Jake's fist came up fast, but Emma was faster. 3 years of Krav Maga training, started after her father's death and continued in secret in their apartment complex's empty community room, had taught her that survival was about speed and precision, not strength. She ducked under the punch, grabbed Jake's extended arm, and used his own momentum to send him sprawling across the hallway floor. The sound of the quarterback's body hitting polished linoleum was the most beautiful thing she'd ever heard. The crowd that had gathered to watch a beatdown suddenly found themselves witnessing something unprecedented. Drew Wilson, all 200 and 20 pounds of wrestling team muscle, stepped forward to help his fallen leader, but Emma's elbow caught him in the solar plexus with surgical precision. He folded like a cheap lawn chair, gasping for air that refused to come. Ryan reached for her, but she spun away, her backpack swinging in a wide arc that connected with his face hard enough to send him staggering backward into a bank of lockers. Matt Stevens, still clutching his phone, started to retreat, but Emma's voice stopped him cold. "Keep recording," she said, her words carrying the authority of someone who had nothing left to lose. "Make sure you get everything. Evidence works both ways." The irony wasn't lost on anyone present that the same technology they'd planned to use for her humiliation was now documenting their downfall. By the time Principal Martinez arrived, alerted by the commotion and the rapidly spreading social media posts, the hallway looked like a war zone. Jake Morrison sat on the floor holding his jaw, his perfect quarterback image, literally and figuratively, shattered. Drew Wilson was still struggling to breathe while Ryan Phillips dabbed at his bloody nose with tissues provided by sympathetic onlookers. Emma stood in the center of it all, her shirt torn and stained with blood, but her spine straight, and her eyes clear. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The principal, a woman in her 50s who'd been navigating the political minefield of public education for 2 decades, took one look at the scene and knew her carefully maintained reputation was about to explode. The mayor's son was on the FAM ground. The wrestling team captain was incapacitated. The developer's kid who donated the new computer lab was bleeding. And standing over all of them was a scholarship student who looked like she'd been through a meat grinder but was somehow still standing. Emma spent the next 2 hours in the principal's office, answering questions with the kind of detailed precision that made administrators nervous. She provided exact timestamps, quoted specific threats, and described the assault with clinical accuracy that suggested she'd been preparing for this conversation for months. When Principal Martinez asked why she hadn't reported the harassment earlier, Emma's response was simple and devastating. "Would you have believed me?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a fire nobody wanted to acknowledge. They both knew the answer. Jake Morrison was the golden boy, the quarterback who'd led Riverside to their first state championship in 15 years. His father wasn't just the mayor. He was the kind of political powerhouse who could make or break careers with a phone call. Emma Carter was a scholarship student from the wrong side of town, the daughter of a dead cop who'd never learned to keep her head down. The official story, crafted by lawyers and public relations specialists, would paint the incident as a mutual altercation, a misunderstanding between students that had escalated beyond anyone's intentions. Both parties would receive equal suspensions. Both families would be encouraged to pursue conflict resolution through proper channels. The media would be assured that Riverside High School took all incidents of student violence seriously and was committed to maintaining a safe learning environment for all. The real story was spreading through social media faster than wildfire. In a drought, Matt Stevens' phone had captured everything, from the initial assault to Emma's spectacular retaliation. The footage was grainy and shaky, but the audio was crystal clear. Jake Morrison's voice demanding she know her place, followed by the sound of her head hitting metal. Emma's blood-stained face as she delivered her challenge. The sickening thud of bodies hitting the floor as she systematically dismantled 3 boys who outweighed her by a combined 400 pounds. By the time Emma walked out of the principal's office, the video had been viewed 30,000 times. The hashtag locker girl was trending locally. News outlets were calling the school for comment. And somewhere in the administrative offices of Riverside High School, powerful people were having conversations about damage control and liability and the kind of problems that didn't go away with standard public relations responses. Emma's mother picked her up from school that afternoon, her face a mixture of pride and terror as she examined her daughter's injuries. Lisa Carter had raised a fighter, but she'd also raised a target, and she knew from bitter experience that targets didn't survive by playing fair. They drove home in silence through the tree-lined streets of Millbrook, past the perfect houses with their perfect lawns, and their perfect families who'd never had to choose between justice and survival. That night, as Emma sat in their small apartment icing her bruises and fielding calls from reporters, she realized that the locker incident was just the beginning. She'd drawn first blood, but the war was far from over. Jake Morrison and his crew wouldn't disappear quietly into the night. They'd regroup, plan their revenge, and come back stronger than before. The only difference was that this time, Emma would be ready for them. The suspension lasted exactly 3 days, long enough for the lawyers to craft their narratives and the public relations team to coordinate their response. When Emma returned to Riverside High School on Friday morning, she discovered that surviving one battle had only painted a larger target on her back. The hallways parted before her like she carried some contagious disease, students pressing themselves against lockers to avoid contact while their eyes followed her every move with the morbid fascination usually reserved for accident scenes. Jake Morrison's jaw was wired shut, a detail that brought Emma no satisfaction but plenty of unwanted attention. The quarterback's inability to speak had transformed him into a martyr figure, his silence interpreted as noble suffering rather than the natural consequence of picking the wrong fight. His teammates wore matching black armbands during practice, a gesture that local news outlets described as touching solidarity. The fact that those same teammates had stood by watching while their captain tried to crush a girl's skull seemed lost on everyone in positions of authority. Mrs. Rodriguez, the guidance counselor, summoned Emma to her office within an hour of her return. The woman's desk overflowed with incident reports, legal documents, and what appeared to be architectural plans for a new wing of the school. The nameplate reading guidance counselor seemed increasingly ironic given the complete absence of actual guidance in the conversation that followed. Emma settled into the uncomfortable plastic chair across from the desk, noting how Mrs. Rodriguez couldn't quite meet her eyes. The woman shuffled papers with the nervous energy of someone preparing to deliver bad news wrapped in administrative speak. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the practiced tone of someone who'd had this conversation many times before with different students in similar circumstances. The district had conducted a thorough investigation, Mrs. Rodriguez explained, reviewing all available evidence and interviewing multiple witnesses. The conclusion was that both parties had contributed to the escalation of tensions, though Emma's response had been disproportionate to the initial provocation. The school was prepared to offer her a transfer to Lincoln High School across town, a fresh start where she could focus on her academics without the social complications that had developed at Riverside. Emma listened to the entire presentation without interruption, watching Mrs. Rodriguez's face as she outlined the transfer process, the academic credits that would transfer, and the counseling services that would be available to help her adjust to her new environment. When the guidance counselor finished speaking, Emma asked a single question that cut through all the bureaucratic padding like a blade through tissue paper. The question was simple enough. What happens to Jake Morrison? The answer came in the form of uncomfortable silence and careful explanations about different circumstances and varying levels of accountability. Jake would be returning to classes once his jaw healed, naturally resuming his position on the football team for the remainder of the season. His college recruitment opportunities remained intact, his scholarship prospects undiminished by what was being characterized as a mutual altercation. Emma's response was delivered with the kind of calm precision that made Mrs. Rodriguez's hands tremble slightly as she reached for her coffee cup. She would not be transferring to Lincoln High School or anywhere else. She would be returning to her classes, completing her scholarship requirements, and graduating from Riverside High School as originally planned. If the administration had concerns about her continued presence on campus, they were welcome to address those concerns through proper legal channels. The meeting ended with Mrs. Rodriguez promising to keep Emma's file open for ongoing support, and Emma walking out of the office with the distinct impression that she was entirely on her own. The hallway outside the guidance office buzzed with the kind of nervous energy that preceded major storms, students clustering in small groups, their conversations dying abruptly whenever she passed within hearing range. Ashley Chun appeared at Emma's locker during lunch break, materializing from the crowd like a ghost returning to haunt familiar territory. The girl looked older than her 19 years, her eyes carrying the weight of experiences that aged people prematurely. She wore long sleeves despite the warm October weather, and her hair was cut in a style that seemed designed to hide as much of her face as possible. Ashley had driven down from Portland State University, ostensibly to visit her old teachers, but actually to deliver a warning that couldn't be transmitted through phone calls or text messages. She'd been following the social media coverage of Emma's locker incident, recognizing the familiar pattern of escalation that had defined her own final months at Riverside High School. The conversation that followed took place in whispered tones, beside the same lockers where Ashley had once hidden from her own tormentors. The story Ashley told was both similar to and different from Emma's experience. The harassment had started slowly, social exclusion and academic sabotage designed to undermine her confidence and isolate her from potential allies. The escalation had been gradual but relentless, building toward a confrontation that the perpetrators had carefully planned and orchestrated. Ashley's mistake had been trusting the system to protect her, filing formal complaints that disappeared into administrative black holes while her situation grew increasingly dangerous. The breaking point had come during a school camping trip, a mandatory outdoor education program that took place in the mountains outside Millbrook. Ashley had been assigned to a cabin with girls who'd spent months making her life miserable, isolated from teachers and surrounded by students who'd been conditioned to view her suffering as entertainment. What happened in that cabin had required emergency medical intervention and left scars that would never fully heal. Ashley rolled up her sleeve to show Emma the evidence, a pattern of deliberate burns that spelled out words too cruel to repeat. The perpetrators had used heated metal tools from the camp's craft activities, taking turns to ensure that each letter was perfectly formed. The pain had been excruciating, but the psychological damage had been worse. They'd filmed the entire incident, threatening to release the footage if Ashley ever spoke about what had happened. The cover-up had been swift and thorough. Ashley's parents had been contacted about a camping accident that required immediate medical attention. By the time they arrived at the hospital, lawyers representing the school district were already present with settlement agreements and non-disclosure contracts. The official story involved a malfunctioning camp stove and an unfortunate series of events that resulted in accidental injury. Ashley's parents, immigrants who'd worked multiple jobs to afford their daughters educational opportunities, had been presented with a choice between a lengthy legal battle they couldn't afford and a financial settlement that would pay for Ashley's medical treatment and future education. The decision had been made in a hospital room while their daughter lay sedated, her arms wrapped in bandages that concealed the evidence of systematic torture. The settlement had come with conditions that extended far beyond simple financial compensation. Ashley's transfer to a private school in California had been presented as an opportunity rather than an exile. Her parents had been offered better jobs with companies that coincidentally did business with the school district's major donors. The message had been clear: take the money, stay quiet, and never look back. But Ashley had been looking back for 2 years, following the social media accounts of her former classmates, watching for signs that the pattern was repeating with new victims. Emma's locker incident had triggered every alarm bell in her memory, the familiar escalation of violence. That preceded the kind of systematic torture that left permanent scars on both body and soul. The warning Ashley delivered was specific and terrifying. Jake Morrison and his crew weren't finished with Emma. The locker incident had been a public humiliation that required public revenge. They would wait until the media attention died down, until the administration's focus shifted to other problems, until Emma's guard was lowered by the illusion of safety. Then they would strike with the kind of coordinated brutality that had been their signature for years. Ashley had brought evidence with her, a thumb drive containing files that painted a picture of institutional corruption and systematic abuse that stretched back years. Student records that had been altered or deleted, medical reports that had been suppressed, legal settlements that had been sealed to protect the perpetrators rather than the victims. The pattern was clear to anyone willing to look. Riverside High School had been covering up serious crimes for years, sacrificing vulnerable students to protect the children of powerful families. Emma pocketed the thumb drive and listened to Ashley's final piece of advice. The system wouldn't protect her because the system was designed to protect them. The only way to survive was to be smarter, more prepared, and more ruthless than they expected. The next attack would come when she was isolated and vulnerable, probably during an after-school activity or social event where witnesses would be scarce and help would be unavailable. As Ashley walked away, disappearing into the crowd of students streaming toward their afternoon classes, Emma felt the weight of inevitability settling on her shoulders like a heavy cloak. The war she'd started with her fists in the East Wing hallway was about to escalate beyond anything she'd imagined. Jake Morrison's silence was temporary, but his desire for revenge would be permanent. The only question was whether Emma would be ready when the moment came. The thumb drive Ashley had left contained enough evidence to destroy half the administrative staff at Riverside High School and implicate several prominent Millbrook families in covering up serious crimes. Emma spent the weekend in her apartment's cramped living room, her laptop screen glowing in the darkness as she methodically cataloged years of systematic abuse. Medical records showed suspicious patterns of injuries among scholarship students. Disciplinary files revealed complaints that had been buried or dismissed without investigation. Financial documents exposed payments made to families who agreed to keep quiet about incidents involving star athletes. The most damning evidence came in the form of encrypted video files that painted Jake Morrison not as an isolated bully, but as the latest in a dynasty of violence. His older brother Marcus had graduated 3 years earlier, leaving behind a trail of victims who'd been systematically silenced through intimidation and financial pressure. Their father, Mayor Morrison, had apparently learned from Marcus's mistakes, developing more sophisticated methods of damage control that protected his sons while destroying anyone who threatened their futures. Emma cross-referenced the files with public records, social media posts, and news articles, building a comprehensive picture of corruption that stretched from the school board to the mayor's office. The pattern was clear and terrifying. Riverside High School wasn't just covering up individual incidents of bullying. They were operating as accomplices in a criminal enterprise that had been destroying lives for over a decade. Monday morning brought an ominous shift in the atmosphere at Riverside High School. Jake Morrison returned to classes with his jaw unwired, but his speech still slightly slurred, a reminder of their hallway encounter that drew sympathetic glances from teachers and administrators. Emma watched him navigate the corridors with renewed confidence. His crew reformed around him like iron filings drawn to a magnet. The black armbands had been replaced by matching red ones, a symbol whose meaning became clear when she discovered the social media posts. The red represented blood debt, a concept Jake had borrowed from his brother's fraternity traditions. According to the cryptic messages circulating on private group chats, Emma Carter owed a debt that could only be paid through public humiliation, followed by private revenge. The posts were carefully worded to avoid explicit threats, but the message was unmistakable. The locker incident had been a declaration of war, and wars required decisive conclusions. Ryan Phillips had emerged as Jake's primary strategist during the suspension, his surgical precision perfectly suited to planning complex operations. Unlike his impulsive leader, Ryan understood the value of patience and preparation. The hallway assault had failed because it was spontaneous and public, carried out in front of witnesses with recording devices. Their next encounter would be private, controlled, and documented only by cameras they controlled. Emma's chemistry teacher, Ms. Bennett, proved to be an unexpected ally in the psychological warfare that dominated her daily existence. The young educator had been teaching at Riverside for only 2 years, long enough to recognize the patterns, but not long enough to be completely corrupted by the system. During a lab session focusing on explosive chemical reactions, she pulled Emma aside for a conversation that would prove prophetic. Ms. Bennett had been reviewing the security footage from the hallway incident, ostensibly to prepare her testimony for the disciplinary hearing that would never come. What she'd observed in Jake Morrison's behavior, both before and after the confrontation, suggested someone with extensive experience in coordinated violence. His positioning, his crew's movements, even their recovery after Emma's counterattack, displayed a level of tactical awareness that indicated significant planning and practice. The teacher's concern wasn't limited to Emma's immediate safety. Ms. Bennett had been quietly documenting suspicious injuries among her students for months, noting patterns that suggested systematic abuse targeting specific demographics: scholarship. Students, minorities, and anyone who excelled academically seemed to experience higher rates of accidents, illnesses, and family emergencies that conveniently occurred during important tests or college application deadlines. Emma absorbed this information while pretending to focus on her chemical equations, her mind cataloging yet another piece of evidence that painted Riverside High School as something far more sinister than a typical suburban educational institution. Ms. Bennett's final warning was delivered in whispers as students began filing out of the classroom. Jake Morrison's crew had been asking questions about Emma's schedule, particularly her after-school activities and transportation arrangements. The realization that she was being actively hunted transformed Emma's daily routine into a complex dance of misdirection and preparation. She varied her routes between classes, avoided predictable patterns, and began carrying items that could serve as weapons if necessary. Her father's training had emphasized situational awareness above all else, the ability to recognize threats before they materialized into violence. Cole Davidson proved to be the weak link in Jake's reformed crew, his guilt over the locker incident manifesting in nervous behavior that Emma learned to read like a roadmap to their intentions. When Cole avoided making eye contact during shared classes, she knew they were planning something immediate. When he seemed more relaxed and social, she could assume they were still in the preparation phase of whatever revenge they were orchestrating. The breakthrough came during a fire drill on Wednesday afternoon, when Emma noticed Cole deliberately positioning himself near the emergency exit, closest to the abandoned gym storage room. The building was over 40 years old, filled with forgotten spaces and neglected corners that provided perfect venues for the kind of private confrontation Jake Morrison preferred. Emma had explored these areas during her first weeks at Riverside, mapping potential escape routes and identifying locations where help would be unlikely to arrive quickly. Matt Stevens continued his role as the crew's unofficial documentarian, but his equipment had become more sophisticated since the locker incident. Instead of relying on his phone's built-in camera, He now carried professional recording equipment that could capture high-quality footage in low-light conditions. The upgrade suggested they were planning something significant enough to require permanent documentation, probably for the same blackmail purposes that had silenced previous victims. Drew Wilson's behavior provided additional intelligence about their timeline and intentions. The wrestler had always been the muscle of the operation, but his recent conversations with teammates suggested he was recruiting additional participants for whatever they were planning. Emma overheard fragments of discussions about teaching lessons and settling scores that indicated they were assembling a larger group for their next attack. The social media component of their strategy became apparent when Emma discovered a series of fake accounts that had been created specifically to target her online presence. The profiles used stolen photographs and fabricated personal information to establish credibility, then began spreading rumors about her family background, her father's death, and her mother's work at the hospital. The posts were designed to isolate her from potential supporters while building a narrative that would justify whatever violence they were planning. Emma's response to this escalating psychological warfare was methodical and devastating. She used the evidence Ashley had provided to trace the fake social media accounts back to their sources, identifying not only Jake's crew but several other students who had been recruited to participate in the harassment campaign. Her father's training in digital forensics, learned during late-night conversations about his investigations, proved invaluable in documenting the electronic trail that connected the online attacks to specific individuals. The most disturbing discovery came when Emma hacked into the school's email system using credentials she'd obtained through social engineering. The administrative communications revealed a level of coordination between school officials and the Morrison family that amounted to criminal conspiracy. Principal Martinez had been receiving regular updates about Emma's academic performance, social interactions, and even her mother's work schedule. The information was being shared with parties outside the school system for purposes that were never explicitly stated, but were clearly intended to facilitate some form of retaliation. By Thursday evening, Emma had assembled enough evidence to destroy not only Jake Morrison and his crew, but the entire administrative structure that had been protecting them. The question was whether she should present her findings to law enforcement immediately or wait for their inevitable attack and document it as additional evidence. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, reminding her that the most dangerous moment in any investigation was when the criminals realized they were being watched. Emma made her decision as she sat in her bedroom reviewing the files for the 100th time. She would not run, she would not hide, and she would not rely on adults who had already proven their willingness to sacrifice her safety for their own convenience. Jake Morrison wanted to finish what he'd started in the hallway, and she was going to let him try. The only difference was that this time, she would be controlling every variable in the equation that would determine who walked away and who didn't. The trap was set for Friday afternoon, disguised as a mandatory meeting with Principal Martinez regarding Emma's academic standing. The text message arrived during her chemistry class, displaying the principal's official school number and containing language that sounded authentically bureaucratic. Emma was instructed to report to the old gymnasium storage room immediately after school for a private conference about her scholarship status and recent disciplinary concerns. Emma stared at the message for several long moments, recognizing it for what it was while simultaneously appreciating its tactical elegance. Jake Morrison had learned from their hallway encounter, understanding that spontaneous violence was messy and unpredictable. This invitation promised privacy, isolation, and a kind of controlled environment where his crew could work without interruption. The choice of location was particularly clever, as the storage room was technically still school property, but far enough from administrative offices to ensure no accidental witnesses. She typed a quick response acknowledging the meeting, then spent the remainder of chemistry class making final preparations for what she knew would be the decisive battle in their escalating war. Her backpack contained items that most students wouldn't recognize as weapons, but that her father's training had taught her to appreciate for their defensive potential. A heavy-duty flashlight that could double as a bludgeon, chemical compounds from the lab that could create blinding smoke or caustic reactions. Most importantly, a small recording device that would capture everything about to unfold. The final bell rang at 3:15, and Emma watched through the classroom windows as students flooded toward the parking lot and bus loading areas. Jake Morrison's crew lingered near the main entrance, their positioning designed to appear casual while ensuring that Emma couldn't leave the building without passing their observation post. Ryan Phillips checked his watch repeatedly, his surgical precision extending to timeline management. Matt Stevens adjusted his recording equipment one final time. The professional-grade camera hidden inside a modified school backpack, Drew Wilson cracked his knuckles with the anticipation of someone who'd been promised the chance to inflict serious damage. Emma took a circuitous route through the school's labyrinthine hallways, using her knowledge of the building's layout to avoid the obvious paths while maintaining the illusion that she was genuinely responding to an administrative summons. The old gymnasium had been constructed in the 1970s as part of a massive expansion project, but budget cuts had forced the school to build a newer, more modern facility 20 years later. The original structure now served primarily as storage for outdated equipment and forgotten supplies. The storage room occupied the building's northwest corner, accessible through a heavy steel door that required a key card for entry. Emma had obtained the necessary access credentials weeks earlier by following a janitor and memorizing his security codes, part of her comprehensive reconnaissance of the school's hidden spaces. She swiped the card and pushed open the door, stepping into a cavernous space filled with decades of accumulated athletic equipment, broken furniture, and boxes of files that no one had bothered to organize or discard. Jake Morrison emerged from behind a stack of wrestling mats, like a predator who'd been waiting patiently for his prey to enter the killing ground. His jaw had healed completely, but the slight scar near his mouth served as a permanent reminder of their previous encounter. The rage in his eyes burned with the intensity of someone who'd spent weeks planning this moment, crafting scenarios and rehearsing violence until every detail had been perfected. Ryan Phillips stepped out from the opposite side of the room, blocking Emma's retreat while maintaining the tactical spacing that had become their signature formation. Cole Davidson appeared near a pile of broken gymnasium equipment, his nervous energy more pronounced than usual as he contemplated participating in violence that would cross lines none of them had crossed before. Matt Stevens positioned himself in an elevated location atop some stacked boxes, his camera angle calculated to capture maximum detail while remaining safely distant from the physical confrontation. Drew Wilson was the last to reveal himself, rising from a crouch behind a bank of old lockers like a mountain of muscle and barely controlled aggression. His wrestling background had taught him to think of conflict in terms of submissions and dominance, concepts that translated perfectly to the kind of prolonged torture that Jake Morrison had been planning for weeks. The metallic objects in his hands caught the fluorescent light, revealing tools that had been specifically chosen for their ability to inflict pain without causing immediately life-threatening injuries. Emma stood in the center of the storage room, surrounded but not surrendering, her body language communicating the kind of calm confidence that had infuriated Jake Morrison since their first encounter. She set her backpack down slowly, her movements deliberate and controlled as she surveyed the tactical situation with the analytical detachment her father had taught her to maintain under pressure. 5 against 1 in an enclosed space with limited escape routes, but also limited visibility and numerous potential weapons scattered throughout the cluttered environment. Jake's opening speech was a masterpiece of teenage sadism, combining personal threats with family insults and promises of violence that would leave permanent scars on both body and psyche. He described in graphic detail what they planned to do to her, how they would document every moment for future blackmail purposes, and how her mother would receive edited footage that would destroy her faith in her daughter's innocence. The words were chosen for maximum psychological impact, designed to break Emma's spirit before the physical torture began. Emma's response was a single question delivered with perfect calm. "Are you finished talking, or should I start without you?" The interruption clearly wasn't part of Jake's script, and his momentary confusion gave her the opening she'd been waiting for. Her hand found the heavy-duty flashlight in her backpack's side pocket, and she hurled it with perfect accuracy at the room's main electrical panel. The impact triggered a shower of sparks and plunged the storage room into near-total darkness. The tactical advantage shifted instantly. Jake Morrison's crew had planned their attack assuming adequate lighting and clear sight lines, but Emma had been preparing for exactly this scenario. Her father's training had emphasized that darkness was a force multiplier for anyone willing to embrace chaos over control. She moved through the cluttered space with the confidence of someone who'd memorized every obstacle and potential weapon during her reconnaissance visits. The first casualty was Cole Davidson, whose nervous energy made him the most predictable target in the confused darkness. Emma's elbow found his throat with surgical precision, dropping him to the concrete floor where he remained gasping for air that refused to come. Drew Wilson lunged toward the sound of the impact but encountered only empty space and a strategically placed wrestling hurdle that sent him sprawling across a pile of broken gymnasium equipment. Matt Stevens tried to activate his camera's low light recording function, but Emma had anticipated this possibility. The chemical compound she'd prepared during chemistry class created a dense, irritating smoke when mixed with water from a broken drinking fountain. Within seconds, the storage room filled with a fog that made breathing difficult and recording impossible. Matt's expensive equipment became useless, and his elevated position transformed from an advantage into a trap as he struggled to navigate down from the stacked boxes while choking on chemical vapor. Ryan Phillips attempted to coordinate a tactical response, but his surgical precision required the kind of controlled environment that no longer existed. Emma used the darkness and confusion to her advantage, striking from unexpected angles before disappearing into the maze of stored equipment. Her knowledge of the room's layout allowed her to move silently while her attackers stumbled through obstacles they couldn't see. Their breathing labored from the chemical smoke that continued to thicken throughout the enclosed space. Jake Morrison's rage transformed into genuine fear as he realized that his carefully planned ambush had become a nightmare scenario, where he was trapped in darkness with someone who seemed to anticipate his every move. His voice cracked as he called out threats and demands, but Emma's only response was the sound of her movement through the cluttered space and the occasional impact as another member of his crew encountered an obstacle or strategic strike. The recording device Emma had activated before the lights went out captured every sound, every threat, every confession that spilled from Jake Morrison's lips as desperation replaced confidence. His crew's voices joined the audio record, documenting their intentions and revealing details about previous attacks that would prove invaluable to investigators. Matt Stevens inadvertently provided additional evidence when he attempted to call for help, his panicked phone conversation revealing the premeditated nature of their assault. Emma's systematic dismantling of Jake Morrison's crew took exactly 17 minutes, a time frame she'd calculated based on her estimates of how long the chemical smoke would remain effective and how much time would elapse before someone investigated the power outage. Drew Wilson was the most challenging opponent due to his size and wrestling experience, but even he couldn't overcome the tactical disadvantages of fighting blind in an environment designed to favor someone smaller and more agile. By the time emergency lighting activated in the hallway outside the storage room, Jake Morrison found himself alone with Emma Carter in circumstances that represented the complete inversion of his original plan. His crew lay scattered throughout the cluttered space, incapacitated by a combination of chemical exposure, strategic strikes, and encounters with carefully positioned obstacles. The recording equipment that was supposed to document Emma's humiliation had instead captured audio evidence of conspiracy, assault, and attempted kidnapping. Emma's final act of revenge wasn't physical violence, but something far more devastating to someone who'd built his identity on projecting strength and dominance. She activated her phone's camera and recorded Jake Morrison in his current state. Alone, defeated, surrounded by his incapacitated crew, and reduced to begging someone he'd tried to torture. The footage would be uploaded to every social media platform before he could formulate a coherent plan for damage control. Principal Martinez arrived 20 minutes later, accompanied by school security officers who'd been investigating the power outage in the old gymnasium. The scene they discovered defied every assumption they'd made about the private meeting that was supposed to take place in the storage room. Emma stood calmly near the door, her clothing torn but her composure intact, while Jake Morrison and his crew required medical attention for injuries that ranged from chemical exposure to blunt force trauma. The evidence Emma presented to the arriving authorities was comprehensive and devastating. The audio recording captured not only the immediate assault, but detailed confessions about years of systematic abuse targeting vulnerable students. Video footage she'd uploaded during the confrontation provided visual documentation of the aftermath, showing Jake Morrison's crew in a state that contradicted any claim of mutual combat or self-defense. But Emma's most powerful weapon was the thumb drive Ashley Chun had provided, containing files that connected the storage room incident to a broader pattern of criminal activity involving school administrators, city officials, and prominent family members. The investigation that followed would ultimately expose a conspiracy that had been destroying lives for over a decade while enriching and protecting the perpetrators. Detective Sarah Williams arrived within the hour, her expression shifting from routine skepticism to genuine alarm as she reviewed the evidence Emma had compiled. The audio recordings alone constituted sufficient grounds for multiple felony charges, but the digital files revealed a criminal enterprise that extended far beyond simple assault. Bank records, medical reports, and administrative communications painted a picture of systematic corruption that would require federal intervention to properly investigate. Jake Morrison's father arrived at the school in a rage that could be heard throughout the administrative wing, his threats and demands echoing through hallways where students and teachers gathered to witness the collapse of the Morrison family's carefully constructed public image. Mayor Morrison's attempts to intimidate the investigating officers only added obstruction of justice charges to his growing legal problems, while his demands for special treatment were documented for use in future corruption proceedings. Social media explosion that followed Emma's upload of the storage room footage transformed her from a local news story into a national symbol of resistance against institutional corruption. The hashtag storage room revenge trended globally within hours, accompanied by thousands of testimonials from students who'd experienced similar abuse in schools across the country. Emma's methodical dismantling of Jake Morrison's crew became a viral phenomenon that inspired copycat resistance movements and forced administrators nationwide to confront their own complicity in covering up systematic abuse. The legal proceedings that followed would take years to complete, but the immediate consequences were swift and decisive. Jake Morrison and his crew faced charges ranging from conspiracy to commit assault to attempted kidnapping, while the adults who'd enabled their behavior confronted federal investigations into corruption, obstruction of justice, and violation of civil rights. Principal Martinez resigned in disgrace, Mayor Morrison faced recall elections, and the entire Riverside High School administrative structure underwent complete reorganization. Emma's transformation from victim to victor to advocate became the foundation for a national movement that challenged the toxic culture of silence and complicity that had protected predators in educational institutions for generations. She testified before congressional committees, spoke at conferences on school safety, and worked with law enforcement agencies to develop protocols for investigating systematic abuse in academic settings. The storage room where Jake Morrison had planned to torture her became a symbol of resistance rather than victimization, transformed into a memorial space where students could honor those who'd been silenced by institutional corruption. Emma returned to that room 1 year later, accompanied by Ashley Chun and dozens of other survivors who'd found the courage to speak their truth, after seeing what one girl with preparation and determination could accomplish against seemingly impossible odds. The final chapter of Emma Carter's story wasn't about revenge or violence, but about the power of evidence, preparation, and refusal to accept that some people were simply too powerful to challenge. Her father's training had taught her that justice was worth fighting for, but her own experience taught her that sometimes the fight required tactics that went beyond what traditional authorities were willing or able to provide. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.